and ask those questions, or if you wish, please do type your questions in the chat. And as we go through the presentation, I'll try to respond to your questions, or at the end, we could respond to the questions at the end as well. So just to begin, I think to sort of set what we're going to talk about for the next hour, this is the agenda that I have. So we'll talk about, I'll do an introduction of WES World Education Services, who we are, what we do at WES, our work, and then I'll begin by sort of setting the frame to speak about barriers to career advancement for immigrants and refugees. Why is it that they are held back? And some of the data that we've been able to collect, and then speak to you about credential migration recognition, one of the how do you identify one of the barriers and some of the solutions. And most of you are working with or have seen a large number of Afghan arrivals. And we have a program that isn't narrowly focused on Afghans, but Afghans are one of the many populations that it serves. So the Gateway Program, I'll talk to you about that briefly, and then we'll finish with the question and answer at the end. As a way of introduction, I'll thank you to Aaron who introduced me, but as a way of introduction, the organization that I work for, I work for an organization called World Education Services, WES, or WES. And WES is a nonprofit social enterprise that was founded over 45 years ago to offer credential evaluation services to international students looking to continue their education in the US. And that's how we were started. Over 20 years ago, we opened our offices in Canada. And so between Canada, based in Toronto, in our office in New York, in the US and Canada, World Education Services completes nearly 500,000 credential evaluations annually. Yes, Eric, sorry, I think I see that.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I think a few people are having trouble hearing you. It sounds like a little muffled and low.
Okay. I've had issues on Zoom with my audio, so I'm not sure if it's the headphones, but I know that they don't get any better if I take them off, so I do apologize.
Oh.
And I'll try to speak louder and slower, if that's okay.
Sure, of course. Thank you.
And let me know if it's an issue, if it continues to be an issue. Right, thank you. About 12 years ago, our organization noticed a large number of individuals who are getting their credentials evaluated, but we're not using the evaluation for any purpose. And so we wanted to understand why. What we learned was most of these individuals were immigrants and refugees who didn't understand the next steps to advancing their career. So Global Talent Bridge, where I work, is created to resolve that issue, to empower immigrants and refugees to understand the value of their education, but also to create resources for service providers to be able to support this population, to be able to get back to their profession. And in addition to World Education, Global Talent Bridge, WES also has a third social enterprise wing that does philanthropy, and that's the WES Miriam Assefa Fund. And the WES Miriam Assefa Fund has offered grants to research institutions, to service providers, and those that work with immigrants educated internationally, to be able to help them get back to their profession, and to also better help us understand what we are missing as a community and not taking advantage of, or work allowing these individuals to use their education experience in the US. Just so to help us frame who we're talking about and the work that we're doing at Global Talent Bridge, I think I already spoke to this, but there are three sort of pillars that we focus on at Global Talent Bridge. And they connect to the kind of communities we work with. One is the targets that we have. One is the immigrant population, so helping to empower them, help them understand that the education and experience that they come into the US has value. And through that, we have a leadership network, and we also create resources that I'll share towards the end for pathways, guides, and other materials that they can use to allow them to get back to their profession. And the second pillar is institutions that work with or that serve immigrants and refugees. And our target here is to help develop resources and an understanding of the value of education that internationally trained immigrant refugees bring to their communities. And so this is through a program that we run, which is called Skilled Immigrant Integration Program, where we offer technical assistance and training and coaching to service providers and state and local government. The third pillar is around advocacy. There's a lot of barriers that keep a lot of them that keep immigrants and refugees from using their international education experience, but on top of which is the lack of recognition or having barriers around licensure. So we try to tackle that as well at Global Talent Bridge. And those are the three pillars of what we do where I work. To help us frame our conversation, I just wanted to begin by sharing some data around what we're saying when we say immigrants educated in the US, immigrants educated in the US. Every year, there's been a growing number. So every day, the numbers here you see on the screen are every decade, or almost roughly every decade. Every year, though, we've seen a number of immigrants the number of immigrants who've come to the US or immigrants who've come to the US have higher and higher levels of education. So more and more of them have a college degree or a college associate's diploma to graduate level degrees. And that trend continues to grow. And most of them, however, are faced with lack of recognition of their education and experience. And then so 1 in 5 are underemployed or unemployed in their profession. And so that's roughly about 2.2 million of the 26 million immigrants and refugees that are in the US. And that's a loss of income both for the immigrants and refugees and to the communities that they live in. And that's roughly about $39 billion. And this is the issue that we want to tackle, is how do we address the underemployment and unemployment and refugees and immigrants? And it really begins with what we've identified as 4 major barriers that sort of hinder their return into their profession or their ability to continue their education to enter a professional career in the United States. And 4 of these barriers are the first, and what we'll talk about and sort of get an understanding of in this conversation, is the lack of recognition, the lack of educational recognition, or the lack of or inadequate recognition of their credentials earned outside of the US. The second is the lack of education and work experience in the US. So this is additional education. It could be short-term education, it could be graduate studies, it could be professional vocational training, any additional, or their lack of work experience in the US. And this is something that some employers cite as the reasons why someone might not be able to hire for a position. And the third is networking. We call it social capital, that when someone is new to the community, they've not had an opportunity to establish themselves. And so they do not have the networks that would allow them to re-enter their profession or to connect with professionals in their field that can help them get back to their profession. That they might have those ties, those connections in the places that they've come from, but being new to communities, to their new communities, they struggle to establish those networks that would allow them to get back to their profession. And the last one is limited English proficiency. And to address some of the limits around English proficiency for this population to tackle underemployment or unemployment in their profession, I think it's really important to identify contextualized ESL, language training in their profession, where that ties their profession is essential to allow them to get back to their profession. So these are the major barriers that have kept many of the immigrants and refugees who come to the US unemployed or underemployed in their profession. So I said we'll talk about the first issue, the inadequacy of recognizing credentials earned outside of the US. And so to understand it, at least to understand how to tackle that, I think we need to speak about credential evaluation and recognition, and then talk about it so that we first establish an understanding of what it is to get a credential evaluation, and then we can talk about recognition afterwards. Credential evaluation, something that WES does, right? This is what we've started doing in the 1970s, since 1974, we've continued to do. And these are reports that we complete a year, so 500,000 evaluations that we complete. And the evaluation report basically compares academic accomplishment of someone educated outside of the US to standards in the US, and then provides a US academic equivalency of their educational accomplishments. Credential evaluation is a report mainly done by third party, sometimes done by institutions that are either hiring or admitting an internationally trained individual. But it is to help these receiving institutions understand the experience and training of someone who completed their coursework outside of the US to standards in the US. And that's basically what a credential evaluation is and nothing more. It is mainly used for three purposes. First is to pursue a license. And so if someone's profession is regulated, so a doctor, an engineer, these professions are regulated, and regulation requires that an individual sits through an exam, but also provides, if they're educated outside the US, credential evaluation, and that shows that they have met the requirements in order to sit for the licensure exam and to receive a license in that profession. And then so credential evaluation is useful to an individual who's pursuing a license, or if you're working with someone who's in that profession, credential evaluation is something that they need to get back into their profession. The second is for employment. And for employment, employers are not strict on who or what kind of credential evaluation that they accept, but it is helpful to make the argument, to present the case that someone has an education that's equivalent to a US degree and are eligible for employment or meet the requirements for employment. And the third is for continual education. In order for any of your clients who are looking to pursue further education, not to repeat what they've already done, credential evaluation is something that they can use to show what they've accomplished and to transfer some of the credit hours to continue or pursue higher levels of education. There are typically two types of credential evaluations. The first is a document by document report, and a document by document report is a very simple summary of the educational accomplishment of an individual. And so it says what they've accomplished. So if it's equivalent to a US bachelor's, or if it's not, it would say incomplete. And if it's higher or more than a bachelor's degree, it also indicates that equivalency is a college bachelor's and plus. And then the course by course is a far more detailed credential evaluation, and the course by course evaluation breaks down all of the courses that an individual has completed, the grade point that was assigned, and also the credit hours that they also have completed. And typically, a course by course is used for someone looking to use to gain a licensure or to continue their education to study for graduate school. Credential recognition, unlike credential evaluation typically is done by an organization like World Education Services. It is a third party that completes this report. Recognition is the acceptance of that evaluation report for the intended goal of the person who's receiving the evaluation. And so if the person who's receiving the evaluation is looking for employment, it is the employer that recognizes the evaluation. So it is the employer, the licensing body, or the colleges and universities. And it is the acceptance of that report that was completed on behalf of the client by receiving institutions. And the receiving institutions tend to be three of them mainly. There's a fourth one, but it isn't an institution that requires it, and that's immigration. A lot of asylums in their asylum application process sometimes get a credential evaluation to make the case for themselves, but it isn't a requirement of the US immigration system, unlike Canada, which is a merit-based or a point system. An individual who gets their credentials evaluated can use that evaluation to earn enough points or to earn additional points to allow them to migrate into Canada. But because we don't have it in the US, that's not something that is highlighted as an institution that recognizes evaluations. But these three that you see on your screen: employers, licensing bodies, colleges and universities mainly accept credential evaluations for the purposes of either pursuing a license, a continuing education, or employment. Like I mentioned, employers are not as stringent, and so some employers may not require credential evaluation. Other employers might be unsure of the education, universities or colleges that an immigrant or refugee might have attended outside of the U.S. And an evaluation is to help the immigrant refugee to advocate for themselves, to say that they have achieved the academic requirements, or at least they have the academic qualifications in order to be employed by the employer. So it's to advocate on their behalf. So it's credentials recognized, their education experience recognized. For licensing bodies and colleges and requirements where an individual needs to get their credentials evaluated and how they will be recognized. So I mentioned for the line bodies, it really depends on each profession that's regulated has its requirements, and based on those requirements and steps they need in order to achieve a license. WES will evaluate a lot of these requirements for some professions, the education requirements for some professions. So we'll evaluate a nursing degree or an engineering degree. But I think as you're supporting your clients, be aware that for regulated professions, the professions have requirements of where you're supposed to get your evaluated. I mentioned is not universal. There isn't one institution in the United States that fulfills all the requirements for evaluation. There are very many evaluation agencies, and it's very important for your clients and for you guys to understand which agency to use in order to help your clients, especially if your clients are pursuing licensure or if they're looking to get admitted to university or college, because both institutions have stringent requirements on which agency that they accept, or sometimes they do the credential evaluation in-house. For licensing bodies, just as an example, for nursing, there's almost across the country, and this is true definitely in Virginia, there's an organization called CGFNS, and that's the only credential evaluation agency the licensing bodies for nursing in Virginia will accept. And so if your clients were to get a credential evaluation through WES will offer the report, that report will not be used or cannot be used in order to gain a license. So very important to understand what your clients want to do if they're looking to get a license or university college or a college degree or diploma, and want to use their education from their home countries or their countries of education. So make sure that you understand their goal in order for their credential evaluation to be recognized. For colleges and universities, similar to regulatory bodies, each university and college has an admissions requirement, and in their admissions requirement, they list out which agencies that they accept for evaluation. And at times it could be internal, so they might be the evaluation themselves. And so just make sure you understand the admissions requirement. If it's not easy to find, I've always found that we've always recommended, if you look at admissions, they list out how an international student could complete their admissions requirement. The biggest difference between a student and an immigrant and refugee is the visa requirement. International need a J1 or V1 or F1 visa in order to come to the US to study, whereas an immigrant refugee is already here. And so the admissions officers might not be aware. So you might need to advocate on behalf of your client to help the admissions officers understand that they already have a way to recognize the credentials evaluation or the prop, and we're following that. But for an individual who's already here and might not need to go through the international admissions process. So before I go into the Gateway Program, and don't mind taking a quick pause here and allow for any questions around credential evaluation recognition. Hearing none, I'll go to our Gateway Program. The WES Gateway Program, just as a background, was started in 2017, end of 2016 in Canada. And we started this program, if you remember back, it might feel like forever ago, but to about 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, we had a huge influx of Syrian refugees that were brought mainly to Canada. We saw a few, but mainly they had gone to Toronto, to Canada, into the Toronto area. Our office in Toronto, in response with a community in Toronto, and so that included the local city government, universities and colleges, service providers, and others who wanted to support this large number of Afghan Syrian refugees. And that's basically how we were able to start the Gateway programs, and it helping to address this large influx of refugees that were brought to Toronto, who didn't have documents in hand. So they didn't have documents that they only had documents in hand, excuse me. They didn't have documents that they could have sent from back home in order to complete an evaluation. So to support that population that only had documents in their hand and have zero access to reports or any sorts of documents in their country of education, we wanted to create an alternative credential evaluation process, and that's how Gateway was born. But it was expanded beyond Syrian refugees because we noticed there were other populations that needed the support. And so we did a bit of a study at WES, and what we learned is what I've shared here. There are very many countries that produce large numbers of displaced individuals. But the top three currently, according to the UNHCR, UN Commissioner for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Syria, Venezuela, and Afghanistan are the top three refugee-producing countries. And these individuals who have been displaced, like many others, have a lot of barriers. And to them, for most of them who are educated in those countries, their barriers were around not having documents or not having access to documents in their countries of education. And this would hinder their admissions to educational institutions. So if they're looking to pursue higher degrees or continue their education or even find short-term training, they were not able to use their education that they had accomplished outside of in their country of education. And this reduced their opportunities for employment, so they could re-enter their profession. And it made the licensing process far more complicated because they couldn't prove their educational accomplishment. And this obviously would lead to the growth of underemployment and unemployment. And so we felt that there was an opportunity to be able to offer support. Having been around, having done credential evaluations for over 40 years, we've gained a lot of understanding, we've gained a lot of knowledge of the educational requirements of a lot of the countries that are causes of displacement. But we could use that knowledge, that experience, and the trust that we've been able to establish with a network of receiving institutions, whether they would be higher education, licensing bodies, and certainly employers. We wanted to offer the opportunity for refugees who've been displaced that didn't have access to their documents to get a credential evaluation report that they might be able to use to continue their education or pursue a profession that commensurated with their experience. And this was driven mainly by our mission, our goal of supporting upward mobility for immigrants and refugees, and educational mobility using their experience and accomplishments and outside of the US. And so I sort of spoke to this. The solution I mentioned is the WES Gateway Program. And this was developed initially as a pilot to support a large influx of Syrians that had gone into Toronto, seeing how receptive institutions were. It's been expanded. It was expanded initially in Canada from Syrians to 7 communities, and I'll share those countries just in a minute. And since then, since 2019, and we've also been piloting it in the US to support this, to offer this support to those who've been displaced. The eligibility requirement for Gateway is that an individual needs to be educated in one of 7 countries, and the 7 countries are the ones that you see on your screen. Sorry, I had forgotten, I haven't moved the slides, but This is the opportunity I've spoken about a minute ago. Um, so with our experience of 40 years, and having knowledge of the countries, we created this initiative. Um, and it has some strict criteria, like I mentioned. Um, and we do rigorous assessment. And again, we understand that the report is based on the trust that we've been able to build over the years into the receiving institutions, and particularly higher ed institutions, base their decisions for admissions, even though the report might be a little different than the standard report, based on the fact that they have had built relationships with us over the years that we've worked with them. The 7 mentioned that you see on your screen are the main requirement for the program. That an individual needs to be educated in one of these 7 instances in order to be eligible for the Gateway Program. And the countries are Afghanistan, Iraq, Eritrea, Syria, Turkey, Ukraine, and Venezuela. There are exceptions. There are some limitations. For instance, any clients who are educated in Ukraine, most clients are able to get their documents from Ukraine, and so they could go through the standard WES evaluation. However, there's a few, especially those in conflict, who are educated in the conflict areas currently, where the institutions are either not operating or they've been destroyed, and so those individuals would be eligible. Similar to Afghanistan, all credential evaluations for anyone educated in Afghanistan currently would only go through the Gateway Program. But WES only is able to evaluate 31 institutions within Afghanistan. Those are the institutions that we are most familiar with. And we're not able to complete evaluation for anyone who's completed or had their studies from 1996 to 2001. And that's just because WES does not have enough information on the educational requirements in Afghanistan in that time period. But outside of that, anybody who's educated in any of the countries that you see here would be eligible for a gateway evaluation. So the eligibility requirement begins with the country of education, right? So the 7 countries that I mentioned. But we also require that they have some sort of a document, at least one document that we can use to offer evaluation, whether it be a diploma, a transcript, a degree, a student ID, a letter of appointment, a license, anything that would indicate that they have had some level of education in order to receive the document that would show that we can use to reconstruct their credentials and offer them a credential report that they can use to pursue higher education or find employment based on their experience. So the evaluation report we offer reconstructs their experience and offers them a document that shows the equivalency to a US standard for whatever education or whatever degree that they achieve. This highly depends on our capacity and also what we know of the institution that the person has completed their education. So not only that they would need to be educated in a certain country, not only that they need documents, but WES's capacity plays a major part in how we determine eligibility and offer the service to clients. And we see this because it is very different than the standard way that we offer credential evaluation. So just to help you understand, on your screen you see sort of a table with our 2 processes and what makes them different. The first is the standard credential evaluation process. The standard evaluation process is applicant-led. So if you go to our website, an individual would complete an application, they would send their documents, and nobody besides them is involved in that process unless they're seeking support and someone else is helping them. Whereas the Gateway Program requires that they work with a referral agency. The referral agency determines eligibility of the applicant for Gateway. Once they've determined eligibility for services through Gateway, they would help the client complete an application and help the client send documents both to WES and for translation. And then and then offer wraparound services afterwards, mostly employment and other services the client might need. It isn't a requirement, but it is something that we ask of our federal partners. The second difference between a standard evaluation and a gateway evaluation is what we term official and unofficial document. An official document essentially is a document that an individual would have sent to us from their country of education. So either the Ministry of Education or the university or college will send a sealed envelope to us in order for us to authenticate and verify that an individual's education was truly completed, and there are records that the institution has maintained indicating the individual's academic accomplishments. And that's what we call official documents. And we require that these documents be sent directly from the country of education through the Ministry of Education or institution that holds those records. That is the one process, or really a barrier, but also an important process of the evaluation process, the evaluation through the standard process like this. Through Gateway, we understand that's a difficulty because either the institutions have been destroyed, they're not operating, or in some cases, an example being countries like Venezuela or countries like Eritrea, the individual might feel that it is a threat to them and a threat to their family to request these documents since they're seeking asylum in a third country or in the US. And so they're unable to get their documents, or again, I think whatever reason the displaced individual might have not to be able to get their documents, we do not require it to authenticate and verify. We use documents that they provided to us to create an assessment and and develop a credential evaluation report that they can use. In the credential evaluation report, we explain how we were able to issue a report to the client. And that's another distinction between a standard process and a gateway process, or a gateway evaluation. And finally, the last is what I had mentioned just now. We indicate there's an authentication verification statement in the standard process, whereas in the WES Gateway program, we explain how we were able to complete the report for the client. And so these are three main differences between a standard credential evaluation process and a gateway process. And we always encourage if an individual is able to go through the standard process, but if they're not able, the alternative is to reconstruct their evaluation or their academic accomplishments through the Gateway program, as long as they're eligible. And our impact so far has been that we've issued between the US and Canada over 1,500 credential evaluations. They've been accepted by more than 90 educational institutions, regulatory bodies, and employers who received the report. And these institutions who received the report, what I mean by received is they have allowed for the student, if it's a student pursuing higher ed, to be admitted for studies. People have been able to get their licenses to practice in their profession. So teachers, that's the closest example that I can think of a recent client who used the Gateway report is someone who was able to get their teaching license actually in Virginia. And then for employment, if they're looking to re-enter their profession. From our survey, we found out that 93%, an overwhelming number of individuals, are very much happy with the program, with Gateway. It has really been an opportunity for them at a time where there aren't many other opportunities to be able to show their credentials, able to receive a credential evaluation and show their academic accomplishments. Some of the institutions that have recognized a WES Gateway credential evaluation are the ones to see. I've not included all of them. Like I mentioned, we have over 90 between the US and Canada, but wanted to share a few so that you have an understanding of especially the higher ed institutions. And we work with our WES team that connects with higher ed institutions that has a closer relationship with them to make sure that we are educating and receiving institutions at colleges and universities with an understanding of the Gateway program, with understanding of the Gateway evaluation, so that they could proactively use it and also allow their students to take advantage of it. And if they have students from those 7 countries who are struggling to get a credential evaluation, to inform them so that they might take advantage of our services. On your right are a combination of licensing bodies, credential evaluation agencies. So NACES, the National Council of Examiners for Engineering and Surveying, is a credential evaluation agency that creates a report or is trusted to create a report, especially for licensing for folks who are in engineering and architecture. And so they've been able to use a gateway report that an individual was able to reconstruct, use that report in order for them to issue or approve the credential report for the client to sit their licensing exam. SOFAS is for public health. It's a common application for public graduate students, and they've used many of the Gateway Evaluation Report for individuals looking to pursue graduate studies in public health. Excuse me. And so we've really been fortunate in that there's a growing number of institutions that are recognizing the credential evaluation that we offer through Gateway. And I also wanted to finish, having spoken of the impact, with 2 testimonials that we received from the clients in Iraq and Venezuela. One of the clients is able to through Gateway, be able to get first a raise, a promotion, in first place of employment, and then in addition to that, this person was able to also to get a license afterwards. And so that's what they were able to use the credential evaluation for. And the second person is able to continue their education in the US and not have to restart their education, and they were able to use the Gateway evaluation report. Just to give you an idea of how the program is run, how it's delivered, we depend mainly on referral partners. So clients go to a referral partner, the referral partner verifies their eligibility, helps them complete an application, helps them send their documents, and helps to send their documents for translation. Once they've completed the application, once the translation is completed, it is all sent to WES. And WES, once WES has received all documents, all the translated documents, and also the application, then WES will complete their evaluation report in about 15 business days. And this is for the Gateway report. And so once all of that is done, the report is then sent. The evaluation report is sent to the client, and it's also sent to the referral partner. And the client could also ask for one receiving institution or many to receive their report. All of this for Gateway is now free. So any client who is eligible, who needs help to get their credential evaluation completed through the Gateway program, could get support through Gateway for free. It's vouchered until June. And then so if you know of any referral partners, now in Virginia, we have Upwardly Global. So what the map, I should have said this earlier. The map is of all our referral partners. In Virginia, the only referral partner that we have is Upwardly Global, and Upwardly Global only accepts, if you're familiar with them, or unfamiliar with them, only accepts clients that are eligible for their initiative. And Upwardly Global's requirements for eligibility is language proficiency. If someone has a college degree earned outside of the US, and that they've not begun their professional career in the US yet. If they do not meet any of those requirements, then they wouldn't necessarily be eligible for Upwardly Global services, and they might not be able to, through Upload, get their credential evaluated through us. But if there are agencies here who would want to be a referral partner that you see this might be useful to your clients, we will be more than happy to offer training and include you in the map and have you be a referral partner for clients who might need this service and might take advantage of it. I'll finish here. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask. I'll pause and I'll also leave my email. My email is on the screen, and also the Gateway email if you have questions about the Gateway program or want to connect or want to have clients. Please do send an email to gatewaywes@wes.org. And so I'll take a pause here. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask.
We did have one question in the chat from Allison. Can U.S. newcomer immigrants enter the WES Gateway Program for work or study in Canada?
So can you say that again?
Yes, so sorry. Can newcomer immigrants who come to America enter the WES Gateway Program for work or study in Canada?
Yes. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, can someone who is in the US looking to move to Canada use a WES credential evaluation? Is that the question?
I think so. Allison, do you want to elaborate on this question?
Yes, that's exactly it. I was just wondering if somebody entered the US as some kind of immigrant status,
Right.
if they could, direct themselves toward WES Canada.
Yes, they can. So if they're looking to move to Toronto, for instance, as part of the immigration process, if they're going through their application process, because it's a merit-based, appointment-based system, if you have an education, higher education, whatever level of higher education, they typically request that you get a credential evaluation as part of their immigration process. And so yes, they could get a WES evaluation for that purpose. But always, I think with any client, always start with what their goal is. If they're looking to pursue higher ed in Canada, what is the requirement of that higher ed institution for admissions, and then use the credential evaluation that higher ed institution requires, and see if the immigration process might accept the alternative credential evaluation agency that the higher ed institution requires. And so, yeah, yes, we do. Yeah. You had also asked, could you discuss any accommodations for individuals who cannot access their background documents? I think I might have answered that. I hope that's around here. Yeah. Repeating uploads requirements, Uploading Global's requirement. Uploading Global requires that an individual be educated outside of the US, that the individual does not have a professional job in the US, or has not started a professional job in the US. That they've lived in the US less than 7 years, or up to 7 years, but less than 7 years, and that they have some level of English proficiency that would allow them to enter a professional job. Don't see any more questions in the chat.
I have a question. Thank you, first of all, for your presentation. I am wondering, you might have addressed this, but I think I might not have heard everything. If you're interested, or if your agency is interested in becoming a referral partner, what is the process for that?
The process is you would just have to email me. We'll set up a time to see who from your agency might want to go through the training. There's about a 90-minute training on how to help the client complete the application process. And then once that's done, we portal help the client complete an application, and that'll be it. You'll be set out to offer support to anyone. And this is for Gateway. This is for the Gateway program. For the non-gateway evaluations, it's really applicant driven. That means you do not need a referral partner for that. So, but if you're interested, Rachel, please reach out to me. Hopefully you have my email. So please reach out to me. Happy to do it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Kate asked, do you have to have a Saudi refugee status? Can they be an Afghan parolee? We do not request or require, there isn't a requirement for status. We do not have a status requirement. So anybody who's in the US who's interested, who has this educational background, as long as they have some sort of a document, we don't ask anything about their immigration status. They could be an asylum, a refugee, an asylum, parolee, undocumented, really makes no difference to us. Are there any other questions? Hopefully I've answered most of your questions, but as always, please feel free to reach out. I've shared my email. I'll type. This is our general email for most of the team at WES. So if you have questions that are just broad, I'd like to connect with the wider team, please send that an email to nyc@wes.org. If you have gateway related inquiries, or if you have clients who you believe could take advantage of the Gateway initiative, please send an email to gatewayus@wes.org. But if you have any questions or would like to connect with me directly, please feel free to send an email. And I included my email in the chat. All right. Well, thank you so much, all. I think this is it for me.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you so much, Senay, for giving such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, and speak to you soon.
Thank you.
See you.